Okay, we are live for RotoViz Live. Got a awesome episode here today, so I just want to make sure the stream works first before we really get kicking. But looks like we are live for RotoViz Live, Michigan International Speedway. The race will start at 3 p.m. So lineup will lock at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. We are now an hour and 45 minutes before lineup lock. That's okay because we'll have about a 45-minute show for you here. And we'll get to all of your NASCAR DFS questions. But first, I just wanted to remind everybody you can get a listeners-only 30% discount to the NASCAR pass for the rest of the season. So all the information is right here on the side. I got the little sidebar there. rotoviz.com/NASCAR podcast. So if you're a weekly subscriber, make sure to sign up for the rest of the year at that 30% discount rate. It'll be much cheaper than resubbing every week, or even cheaper than the monthly option. So sign up the rest of the year, that 30% discount. Great show today. We have a special guest. We do not have Matt Friedman, Matt at the Oracle. He's going to be bowing out of the RotoViz Live series going forward for NASCAR because NFL season is starting to ramp up here, and so he's got some work to do on that front. So this week, and maybe this week only, maybe going forward, we don't know. We'll see. But I have a special guest. You might know her as Dina Giffinator. That, of course, is my wife, Dina Giffin, at Dina Giffinator on Twitter. Dina, how you doing, honey?
Good. How are you doing?
I am doing well. Are you ready to talk some NASCAR?
Yes,
Are you
I'm
mad
really
at me
excited.
are you mad at me for stealing your Dale Jr. hat?
No, I'm wearing my other one, so we're good.
All right, we are good. So you guys can't see Dina on video. That was the technical difficulties we were having. Couldn't get her webcam to agree right now with the recording platform. So bear with us. We'll figure it out for next week and beyond if she continues on the show, and maybe she will if she does a good job. So, yeah, what do you think, Dina? What do we got today?
So before we get started with the listener questions, we have 5 drivers that are going to the rear of the field. We have Jimmy Johnson, Daniel Suarez, AJ Allmendinger, Landon Castle, and Ty Dillon. Can you talk a little bit about each of these situations and maybe how we should adjust our lineups?
Yeah, definitely. So, I think the big thing here is, so Ty Dillon, he went to the rear, but that's also because his qualifying time was disallowed. So Ty Dillon will start dead last in 37th. That is his official qualifying position as well. So it's not like he qualified further up front. I mean, he actually did, and then got moved to the rear, and so he'll be starting from the rear, but his official qualifying position was 20-something. No, they threw away his official qualifying time because he had an illegal car during qualifying. So he qualified dead last. So his DraftKings starting position will be 37th. His on-track position, starting position, will be back there as well. So play Ty Dillon like you would normally. He is a good play this week. Obviously, starting dead last, he's going to pass all those cars that are slower than him. So play Ty Dillon like normal. I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about him as the show goes on. Then we've got Landon Castle. Landon Castle wrecked his car right before first qualifying, so he didn't end up making a qualifying run. And then he went into a backup car, so that's why he's moving to the rear of the field. So he starts 36th for DraftKings scoring purposes. He'll drop to the rear behind Ty Dillon. It doesn't really matter. He's only dropping one spot. And then also, he was really slow in his backup car in the 2 post-qualifying practice sessions. So don't really recommend Landon Castle as a play this week, even though earlier in the week it looked like if he qualified dead last, he would have been a great play. Not so much now. And I talked about that a lot on the daily podcast. So if you guys want those reasons why, hashtag RV Live in case you missed them, and Dina will get to asking me that question a little bit later. Then we've got Jimmy Johnson and Daniel Suarez. Those two are similar situations. Well, not quite 100% similar. And also AJ Allmendinger. So AJ Allmendinger, Jimmy Johnson, and Daniel Suarez. They qualified, and their qualifying time stands and everything like that. So then they got moved to the rear of the field because of things that happened after qualifying. Daniel Suarez had to change a tire, and by NASCAR's rule, you have to start on your qualifying tire. So if you change a tire, you have to go to the rear field. So Daniel Suarez qualified 20th. DraftKings scoring purposes, he will start 20th, but he'll drop to the rear of the field. That's fine. Play him like normal. I actually like Suarez as a play this week. Jimmy Johnson, he wrecked his car in second to last practice, which is the first practice after qualifying. They end up going to a backup car, so he's moving to the rear of the field. He starts 13th for DraftKings scoring purposes, drops to the rear of the field. again, play Jimmy Johnson like you would normally. I'm not worried about him coming through the field. We saw him earlier, several times this year. He's won coming from the rear of the field, so don't worry about that. Play him like you would normally. And again, we'll talk about how much is normal for Jimmy Johnson this week. Finally, AJ Allmendinger also crashed in final practice. Backup car. He drops to the rear, so he starts 25th for DraftKings scoring purposes, but again, also drops to the rear. I don't really like him this week. Obviously, crashing his main car and going to a backup. It's not like Jimmy Johnson, whose backup is basically identical. They're a little bit less of a top-tier team, so you could see a little bit of a speed difference with Allmendinger. Hasn't turned a lap in his backup car yet. Hasn't been very fast in practice anyway, even in his primary, so I don't really recommend him this week.
All right. Well, now that we've talked about that a little bit, let's get to some listener questions. The first one is from Devin Lowe, and he wants to know, who will you be overweight on in the field? And he also noted that Danica Patrick and Eric Jones worked out well for GPPs in the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, so Danica did work out really well last 2 weeks, and same with Eric Jones. So who am I going to be overweight on in GPPs? Well, that's a good question. Obviously, I've talked about some GPP plays that I like on my article, but then as I've been building lineups, I also kind of sneakily like Ryan Newman. He hasn't been super fast in qualifying, but his $7,200 price tag starting 19th, you've got a nice range of drivers there, starting like 14th through 21st. Eric Jones, Kurt Busch, Casey Kane, Dale Jr., Austin Dillon, Ryan Newman, Daniel Suarez, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr., who all, if they somehow leap into that top 8, top 5, will be in the winning lineup. Now, not all of them at once, obviously, but you need to find the right ones. And I think Newman's priced well enough that he lets you get in some of those expensive drivers. He's only down at 7,200. My model only projects him to be around 10% ownership. I think that could be about right. So I'll probably have maybe 20% Ryan Newman. And the reason is, if you go to the NASCAR Sim Scores app, which is taking comparable drivers with comparable statistics who have raced at Michigan and other similar tracks in the past, it gives Ryan Newman an upside, so an 85th percentile of a finish of 8th. And that finishing position of 8th would definitely get Ryan Newman in the winning lineup. That would give him around 46, 47 DraftKings points. So Ryan Newman is a guy I'll be overweight on. I don't go bananas on him, but I think like 20% on him will be double the field, and you'll have a significant leverage on him. Of course, my other GPP drivers I've talked about, I like Eric Jones in my article. I mentioned Daniel Suarez. I like him. I mentioned him in my article. And so those will definitely be some drivers that are maybe not as expensive that I'll be overweight on. And then either Brad Keselowski or Kevin Harvick, I think, are fine for your place differential type possible dominator as well. So that's where I'm going this week.
That sounds like a really good strategy. Okay. Our next question is, what would roster construction look like for a qualifier? And who would be the contrarian fade and your must-haves?
Say that again.
Okay. What would roster construction look like for a qualifier?
So roster construction for a qualifier, I think obviously the goal of the qualifier is to win, right? So we want to get first place in the qualifier. Which drivers are going to be, you want to build a lineup that has upside. So you're going to want a dominator or two, most likely two, possibly even three. We haven't had any one dominator races here in a while. So if you listen to the pod, it was a lot of 3-4 dominator races, and then it's changed from 3 to 2, and then it was mostly 2. And then last year there was one multiple dominator and one 2 dominator race. So you're going to want at least 2 dominators in your qualifying lineup, whether it's Kyle Larson or Martin Truex Jr. I think you want to pick one or the other. I don't think you want to pick both because, yeah, there's a chance both dominate the race, but I think it's more likely than not it's going to be one than the other. And then I think as the race goes on, you could see somebody like either Brad Keselowski or Kevin Harvick come forward, as I mentioned, maybe a Kyle Busch. Those would probably be like my top 5 dominator candidates. Don't sleep on Denny Hamlin this week. Don't sleep on Joey Logano this week. I know Logano was slow in final practice. He had a good single lap speed. This is a very good track for him, and track history does matter. Plus, Penske can always do something to get him out front. So that said, those are like my dominator candidates, my pool of dominator candidates. So I'd pick 2 of them. More likely than not, I would have either Kyle Larson or Martin Truex Jr. as one of the 2. And then I'd pick at least one of the other ones that I mentioned. Then you want to fill out the rest of your roster with a combination of place differential and finishing position. So maybe you want to find a contrarian dominator or a contrarian play that way through through finishing position and place differential. So I mentioned those names there starting 14th through 21st. I think Stenhouse, Newman, and even Casey Kane could be a little, or Kurt Busch could be contrarian-ish from that pool of names there. Whereas I think Daniel Suarez, Eric Jones, Dale Jr. might be a little more chalky just based off practice speeds. So, those three drivers have much better practices than the other drivers in that starting range. Then, of course, there's Trevor Bayne and Ty Dillon are like the two chalky plays. So I could understand maybe getting away from one of those two. Trevor Bayne, obviously, there's a situation there where his wife could go into labor at any minute and he might have to fly out and leave. So I can understand fading him because he might have to pull into the pits and Ryan Reed could sub in. But so far, all looks good on that front. Then with Ty Dillon, I just have concerns about how far forward he can get. So I think in terms of a fantasy racing World Championship qualifier roster construction, I wouldn't mind fading Ty Dillon. I think he's going to be pretty heavily owned, and I think maybe he only gets up like as a ceiling of like a 20th place finish, which is good. That could get him in the winning lineup, but I think that's his ceiling, and I think more likely than not, we'll see around a 24th, 26th place finish for Ty Dillon just based off speed. He hasn't been one of the fastest cars this weekend, so I can see some interest in fading Ty Dillon in a format where he'll be very highly owned and being contrarian and finishing first place will be rewarded.
Okay, that sounds good. Are you relieved that you already got your qualifier?
You know that. I think you know the answer to that. Yeah, so got that week one, got that taken care of, done and dusted, and let's help some other listeners win a qualifier.
Yeah, I think that sounds awesome. Yeah. Okay, our next question is from Vito. He wants to know what the better cash strategy is: Kyle Larson and Martin Truex, or Kyle Larson and place differential?
That's a really good question, and I think that's why I'm going three cash game lineups this week, as I usually do. I've got one which is both Larson and Truex. I think that's a very viable cash game strategy. Obviously, one or the other will dominate, and playing both increases that floor because you're almost guaranteed to get those dominator points, whether it's Larson or Truex. So that definitely elevates your floor. And then obviously you can fill out the rest of your lineup with the combination of place differential and finishing position, thinking, safety. So you can still play another expensive driver or two, like a Harvick or Brad Keselowski I like in cash games this week, for example, because they qualified 11th and 12th and have some place differential potential built in, as well as some dominator potential. So then you could fill out the rest with place differential plays. The other option, as you mentioned, is just Kyle Larson, foregoing Martin Truex Jr., and then playing place differential. And I like that strategy as well, and that's what I'm going to do with my second cash game lineup is that one, because I think if Truex doesn't lead a bunch of laps, and a lot of people have him in cash games, Truex isn't going to be worth it that much because all he's going to get is finishing position and maybe some handful of fastest laps. And if he doesn't finish in that top three or whatever, he's going to be an interesting fade in cash games and in GPPs. So that's why I'm going to do three. I think I'm going to do one with Truex and Larson, one with just Larson, and then I haven't decided on the third whether I'm going to do another Truex Larson or just another Larson. There's also the option of just doing a Truex. I think that's really contrarian for cash games and probably not the best play. So that's my approach to cash games, is doing three. Now, if you want to pick one, if you want to be different from everybody else, I would just do the Kyle Larson one, and then maybe you can play both Keselowski and Harvick or something like that. So that's my preferred one, but I like more risk. The safer route will be Larson and Truex.
Okay, that sounds like a good strategy. Our next question is from Craig, and he wants to know about Ty Dillon. All in, complete fade, or play the ownership percentage?
I'm going to play the ownership percentage. I think Ty Dillon will be around 45% owned, maybe up to 55%. That's about where my model has him, I think, is around 45%. And I'm just going to play Ty Dillon, I think, right in that 45% range. I want to be right level with the field. And the reason I mention is this. Obviously, there's a chance he could be in the winning lineup if he finishes up in his ceiling, which I think is around 20th according to the NASCAR Sim Scores app. Obviously, that would require him passing several cars. I think he's probably, like I mentioned, around 26th in speed, ballpark 24th, 26th in that range. And then Michigan is a track that doesn't have a lot of attrition, a lot of DNFs, so it'll be hard for him to move up a ton of spots that way. I think that's why 20th place is approximately his ceiling there. So it's not exactly his ceiling, but it's approximately his ceiling would be that 20th place finish. Now that would get him in the winning lineup, and I think the odds of that happening are in that 30 to 50% range. So I think being about where the field is on Ty Dillon is good. The other thing about Ty Dillon, just playing him allows you to get in those expensive drivers that we do expect to dominate, that we do expect to have very good finishes. So that's why I think there's maybe a little bit better than a 30% chance he's in the winning lineup, maybe around 40%, 45%. So I'm just going to be approximately right equal around the field. Obviously, if you want to take a different strategy, you can. If you think he's going to have a good day, go 60, 70, 80% on him if you want, or all in 100%. I mean, that's your risk tolerance level. Or if you think I've made a convincing case that he's only, probably going to be in the winning lineup 30, 35% of the time, then maybe you want to go even less than 30% ownership on him. I mean, 30 to 35% would still be underweight, I think, compared to the field, but maybe you go even less ownership on him and go something like 15% and have that, or completely fade. Again, that's another risky strategy, very risky, but those are ways to get leverage on the field if you want to win a GPP. Now, of course, if things go the opposite way, you'll be in big trouble, right? If you fade Ty Dillon completely and he finishes 15th, not going to be too good of a day for you. And if you go all in on Ty Dillon and he wrecks out, like first driver to wreck out, or only finishes 34th or 3rd or 28th, probably not going to be as good a day. So the safer route is to go overweight on Ty Dillon, because even if he wrecks out, he's not going to hurt you as much. Whereas if you go underweight on him and he does well, you're just going to be destroyed. So that's why I'm going to go 45%, even though I think the odds of him being in the winning lineup are around 35 to 40%.
Okay. Our next question is from Thomas, and we talked a little bit about this at the beginning of the show, but he wants to know specifically, with the drivers moving to the back, how that should affect his cash lineup.
So with the drivers moving in the back, how does that affect cash lineups? I think for me, it doesn't affect much. I wasn't going to play Jimmy Johnson in cash anyway. AJ Allmendinger's not a cash play. Landon Castle, some people will play him in cash. That doesn't affect him, because he's only moving one spot back, and really with the other guys moving back, he's not really changing anything. It helps Ty Dillon, obviously, because those guys are going to drop back behind Ty Dillon, so he already picks up 4-place differential spots. So how it affects cash, I think, by and large, for me, it doesn't. But that's because the drivers it's affecting negatively, I wasn't going to play anyway, and the drivers it's affecting or not affecting, I should say, it doesn't change anything for me. So Daniel Suarez, he drops to the back, but I think he's still an okay cash game play. I mean, he was in the top 10 in final practice in both single lap and 10-lap speed. He was also better in second practice, which was the other post-qualifying practice session. So he's got a car that's better than 20th for sure. He won at Michigan in the Xfinity Series last year. So I like Daniel Suarez, safe play. The only added risk is, of course, him coming through those first several back marker cars that he's passing. So there is added risk there, but I'm going to play him anyway because I think he fits in well with certain roster constructions in cash games, depending on if you go, like we talked about earlier, the Kyle Larson route or the Larson and Truex route. So if you go just the Larson route, I think you can fit in Suarez in one of your cash game lineups like that. So doesn't affect cash game strategy too much for me, but that's mostly because the drivers I wasn't going to play anyway. It either doesn't affect them or negatively affects them, and the drivers I was going to play, it also doesn't really affect them. So it doesn't change cash for me much.
Okay, I think that sounds like a good plan. Our next question comes from Ryan. He wants to know your thoughts on Danica.
Thoughts on Danica. So this is a interesting play here because Danica's been in the winning lineup the past 2 weeks, and she starts 24th here, I think it is. Starting 24th is a good spot for her. I don't know how much added speed she has. She starts 23rd. I don't know how much added speed she has above 23rd. So if I go to her post-qualifying practices, she wasn't like super blow you out of the world quick. But in the 10 lap, she was decent. I mean, she had a 10 lap average that was faster than Joey Logano's in final practice. And they both went out at that 22 to 31 lap range of practice. They both made their 10 lap runs later in the session. But Danica's single lap was 24th. And then if we go back to practice 2, her flipping over here, her single lap was 25th. So not a huge improvement, but I could see, just her having a consistent day. Michigan has been a good track for her. She's never finished worse than 25th in completed races for her. So she has a lot of mid-teen finishes. That could get her in the winning lineup at her price tag. So I will have exposure to Danica Patrick this week. I just wouldn't go bananas on her by any means.
That's really cool that she's been in the winning lineup the past 2 weeks. I like seeing that.
Maybe three in a row, 3 times in a row.
Okay. Ryan also wants to know if there have been any updates on Trevor Bayne as a daddy to be.
Any updates on Trevor Bayne? I'm gonna pull out the Twitter machine and see
Okay.
if there's been any updates. Last I saw was about 30 minutes ago. There had been no updates. Uh, so 1 hour ago, Trevor Bayne still at Michigan. Let me see if there's anything newer. But as far as I've seen, still good to go. So now that can always change right up to lineup lock. So I think a thing I can recommend is I hate Dina, mute your mic real quick.
Oh, sorry.
You're good. So I think a thing I could recommend is using that late swap option if Trevor Bayne does not start the race. So if we find out, at 2:45 Eastern or 2:50 Eastern, there's that late swap button. I would late swap Trevor Bayne to either Chris Buescher or Darrell Wallace Jr. because you have to late swap down in price. You could also late swap to Paul Menard, but you have to do those manually because DraftKings only does it automatically with cheaper price drivers. So if you have salary left on the table, some of those you could late swap to either Paul Menard. You could also late swap to Chris Buescher or Darrell Wallace Jr. So that's how I would kind of prepare leading up to lineup lock, just in case Trevor Bayne does have to fly out, does have to leave. Ryan Reed will take his place. Ryan Reed will get no points for Trevor Bayne if he starts the race in place of Trevor Bayne. If Trevor Bayne starts the race and then mid-race gets replaced by Ryan Reed because maybe his wife goes into labor or whatever during the race, Trevor Bayne will probably come in under a caution. He might even come in under green. I don't know. It depends on how urgent it is. And he'll hop out of the car. Ryan Reed will hop into the car and finish the race for Trevor Bayne. In that scenario, Trevor Bayne would still get all the points, all the DraftKings points, all the real-life NASCAR points, as long as he starts the race. So just be aware of that with Trevor Bayne.
Okay, I think that sounds like a good strategy. It's always, I guess, kind of challenging with these kinds of things, right?
Yeah, it's like when you get like the threat of like rain or a baby or who knows what else. Like sometimes a car won't pass inspection like 20 minutes before the race or something, and they'll have to go to the rear of the field, and all of a sudden a guy who was a great play becomes a fade. So that's why we always need to monitor our lineups before lock.
That makes sense. And I think, too, there's not too many women in NASCAR, but from what I understand from my sister and my friends who have had children is that if she starts labor, it might still be like 2 days before the baby comes out. So there, I guess, could be a chance, too, that if it's slowly progressing, he may stay and finish the race, right? And then fly out.
Well, this is also why I brought you on because, I knew it was going to be a baby week and you're female. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good insight. So I think Trevor Bayne probably is safe for today by and large, but you never know.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Okay, our next question is about Ryan Newman. Would you play Newman in cash or in GPP?
Just GPP. I would not play Ryan Newman in cash. Not a cash game play. Didn't show enough speed in final practice to be one of those guys that we can feel comfortable with place differential just based off speed. Ryan Newman is still a good play though because he has a decent track history, like I mentioned, and he's underpriced. So I'd like him much more as a GPP play because I think he's going to go under-owned. Whereas in cash games, the reason he's going under-owned in GPPs is because he's not a great cash game play.
Okay, I think that makes sense. And I think, too, while we're still talking about GPPs, we have another question about your favorite GPP play that's not mentioned in your article.
That would be Ryan Newman, though. He is my favorite GPP play that's not mentioned in my article. A couple other names I did mention, Darrell Wallace Jr., Chris Buescher, and let's see, who else? I mentioned Dale Jr., I mentioned Eric Jones. You'll be happy about the fact that I mentioned Dale Jr.
Of course, I love Dale Jr.
Yeah. Kyle Busch. I like Kyle Busch as a contrarian dominator. I didn't mention him in my article. I didn't mention Kevin Harvick. Kevin Harvick. So I think those are like my favorite plays that I didn't mention in my article.
Okay. And if you were to fade one of the two top row, who is it and why?
If I was to fade a driver that starts in the first two rows or just in the front row?
It looks like it is one in the first two rows.
Okay, so if I was to fade a driver in the first two rows,
it would be the first four right starting positions.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It would be Clint Bowyer, and that's not because I don't like Clint Bowyer as a driver or as a play this week. I think just I'm gonna play all four of them. I will have the lowest exposure to Clint Bowyer of the front four. I can also see a case for fading Martin Truex Jr. as we talked about. If Kyle Larson gets out front and just starts dominating the race and Truex doesn't, then Truex is a good fade. So I I would rank them in order. I'd fade Boyer first, Martin Truex Jr. second. I like being a little overweight on Kyle Busch. I think he's got a sneaky fast car this week.
Very cool. Okay. Our next question is from David James. He wants to know about Brad Keselowski, specifically that he found some speed in the final practice. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, speaking of David James, congrats to he and his wife. They just had a baby 2 days ago, so speaking of babies there. But as far as Keselowski goes, he definitely found some speed in final practice. First in the single lap average. I think he was right up there, I think it was 6th in the 10-lap average. Even in practice 2, he was up there, 6th in single lap speed. So Keselowski's definitely found some speed. He definitely wants to win at his home track, Michigan. It's also one of Penske's home tracks, so a double home track, I guess you could say, for Keselowski. He's never won there, so very motivated to win. Fast car. I think he's going to be a guy that we have to look at come the end of the race, and there's definitely a chance he could sneak in some fastest laps led dominator points. So definitely like Keselowski this week.
Very cool. Okay. What is your best mid-range relief? Jones, Suarez, Boyer, Newman, maybe someone else?
I definitely like Eric Jones, and I like Daniel Suarez as like my two favorite mid-salary relief drivers. And then I did talk about Newman as a contrarian play that I'll be overweight on. So, I'd rank him Jones, then Suarez, then Newman, then Boyer, but I will have exposure to all four.
Very cool. Okay. And David James has one more question. He wants to know your thoughts on Menard. He had terrible speeds, but he's had 5 straight top 20s at Michigan International Speedway.
Yeah, I mean, Paul Menard has been very, very, very good at Michigan in the past. But what I have noticed is his numbers have come down over time at Michigan as we've taken more downforce off the car. So he's really good in the high downforce situation and not as good in the low downforce situation. And now we're at our lowest downforce situation possible. So Menard, I think, is one driver we can throw track history out for a little bit. Obviously, you can't completely discount it, but I certainly think he struggles to get into that top 20, 24 on speed. I think he might have like a 25th place car tops as like his pure speed upside. Now, obviously, things can happen with strategy and with DNFs and things like that, and he can move up more than that. But not a huge fan of Paul Menard this week. I think you have to have some exposure to him because obviously he does have a great track history. He starts 31st, which is probably too far back for him, so he should get some positive place differential. He just doesn't have a ton of upside. So I think in GPPs, you want to cap your Menard exposure, kind of like you want to cap your Landon Castle exposure, and even, in my opinion, cap your Ty Dillon exposure.
Okay, that's actually a really good segue because our next question is about Ty Dillon. What are your thoughts on fading him? And Eric wants to know specifically his practice speeds have been in the mid-20s as well as single lap.
So, I think with Ty Dillon, I talked about him, practice speeds in the mid-20s. Definitely, I think that's right around his average car speed there. And at Michigan, we get what I call the separation of speeds. The fast cars are really fast. The medium cars tend to be medium, and the back markers tend to be back markers. You don't see this mix-up like we do at Martinsville or occasionally at Bristol or some of these other tracks. This is even more separation of speed than you get like a mile and a half. So I think Ty Dillon, based purely off speed, again, about with Menard there, he only has maybe a top 24, or 24th place best car at best. I think that's like his upside on pure speed. Again, things can happen. We could see some DNFs, some strategy. He could, his upside is around a 18th, I think, to 20th place finish on like normal randomness. And then like crazy wacko randomness. Obviously, he has more upside than that, but like I think like his 85th percentile is around the 18th to 20th finishing place position. So that's why I like being about equal weight to the field on Ty Dillon. I'm not going to go overweight on him because I think some people will try to go overweight on him, and that could work out fine for them. Obviously, if he hits his ceiling, but I think his ceiling or his between his median and his ceiling finish might not be good enough to get him into the winning lineup in GPPs, and that's certainly a good chunk, more than 50% of his range of outcomes there. So I definitely don't want to be over 50% on Ty Dillon, and I think a lot of people will keep his ownership up there around 45, 50% because he's a safe play, but we want upside in GPPs, and I think his upside is limited.
Can you define crazy wacko randomness for me?
Yeah. You've met our dog, right?
Of course.
Yeah, just think about like when he goes bananas and how much damage he does to the house.
Oh, okay. Like when he sees his dog walker Sam or me
Yeah, and
putting on running shoes and he like does
his
his like
tail.
6 foot vertical leap.
Yeah, and his tail whips everything off the coffee table. I mean, that's like what we would need. That kind of carnage, I think, for on the track. Just send the dog out on the track. But seriously, though, I think we need a lot of some crashes or some wild fuel strategy or something like that for Ty Dillon to have better than an 18th place finish, in my opinion.
Okay, I think that makes sense. I like the dog metaphor. David Haley wants to know, what do you do with McDowell this week, exposure wise?
I'm 0% on him. I think again we have a track we're at separation of speeds here. Um, what's his name? McDowell qualified too far forward for me. Qualified, I think it was 22nd or something like that. Yeah, 22nd. He practiced 28th and 29th. Just not keeping up with the field. So he's going to drop backward. Yeah, salary relief, but I don't think you need to drop down too far in salary this week for a ton of your exposure. So this is a week where we like last week at Pocono, where we got this separation of speeds, and I called it at Pocono. None of those back marker cars are in the winning lineup. None of them even really got close. So I think we're going to see something similar this week. I'm probably just playing drivers that are, top 28, 9, 30 on speed. I think like Menard, Darrell Wallace Jr., AJ Allmendinger, Chris Buescher would be like the back range of my cars there that I would play. I'm not playing Dinger, as I mentioned, because of the crash issue, but like normally just based off speed, those would be the back marker cars, or the furthest back cars I'd play. McDowell is slower than all of them, so I probably won't play McDowell, especially given he qualified further forward.
I think that makes sense. Whenever I think of Michael McDowell, I always think of I think it was either Michael or Daryl Waltrip, and how they say Michael McDowell.
Larry McReynolds, Michael McDowell.
Oh, it's Larry McReynolds. Okay, yeah.
Michael McDowell.
Michael McDowell.
I always think of his big wreck at Texas. That was one of the scariest wrecks I've ever seen, and he walked away unharmed.
Oh gosh, was that the one where he was in Kyle Busch's car? Or was that a different one?
He was in the 00 or the Aaron's Dream Machine or something like that. So I think he was racing for Michael Waltrip Racing at that point.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that. That was a crazy crash.
Yeah.
Okay, our next question is from Devin. He wants you to rank drivers starting 14 to 19 for GPP finish position upside.
14 to 19 starting position for GPP upside. All right, let's do this. Eric Jones, 1. I think Daniel Suarez, 2. Dale Jr., 3. I'm going to go with, it's really close between Casey Kane and Ryan Newman for 4 and 5. And then I'd say Austin Dillon, 6. But even Austin Dillon's close there as well. So that's what I would go. Oh, and I forgot Kurt Busch. I think Kurt Busch I'm going to put last, not because I think he has less upside, but I think he's priced higher than everybody at 8,500. So you have to really think about upside relative to price. So I'm going to rank Kurt Busch last of those.
Okay, I think that makes sense. Our next question is from Dean, whose Twitter picture is a ceiling fan, which is probably one of the funniest things I've seen in a while.
I like it. We need to buy some, by the way, because we're just moving into our new house and we have 4 or 5 ceiling fans to buy.
Yeah, we need 5.
Right,
one for each bedroom and then one downstairs.
I'm gonna call Dean. Dean, shout out to you. I'm gonna get your advice on ceiling fans, since that's a really cool Twitter, Abby.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Okay. He wants to know if there's really any downside to 100% Dillon at his price.
Yeah, there's downside. It's a lot safer to go 100% Dillon than 0% Dillon. I will mention that. But there's downside in the fact that, what if he finishes 28th, 29th? He's not going to be in the winning lineup, 26th, right? He's not going to be in the winning lineup at that spot. So, like I said, I think he has about a 35 to 40% chance of being in the winning lineup. I'm going to go about 45% on him because I do want that little bit of added safety. And I think a lot of people will go overweight on him. So I want to be equal to the field. But, if things happen in NASCAR, I mean, we talk about it all the time. Things happen. We've seen Chase Elliott get wrecked into from behind by Brad Keselowski because a piece of Jeffrey Earnhardt's car fell off and Chase hit it, slowed him down, and Keselowski platted him. That's neither Keselowski nor Chase's fault. That's just shit that happens in NASCAR. So there's a 15% chance, that Ty Dillon has some serious problems and doesn't end up, anywhere near being in the winning lineup. Then there's the probability that he hits his median projection, which is around 24. That probably doesn't get him in the winning lineup, or gets him right on the border of the winning lineup. And then he would need to get beyond his median projection to kind of be in the winning lineup. So you take 50% plus the 10 or 15% DNF issue. And there's also the chance that something late in the race happens. It's not a major issue, but like he gets a speeding penalty in the last pit stop or something. So add all that up, there's like a 35-40% chance he's in the winning lineup, and I'm going to be 45% on him. So there's downside to playing 100% because if bad things happen, you're going to have a tough time. You might min cash a bunch in GPPs, but you're not going to win a GPP.
Very cool. Okay. Our next question is from Tom, and he wants to know if Kyle Busch's past track history concerns you. Specifically, how does past track history versus weekend speeds factor in for this race?
That's a great question. And I think that's the reason my model is really low on Kyle Busch, relatively speaking, is that his track history is poor. He's not been great at Michigan, period. He hasn't led laps. He hasn't had a ton of fastest laps. He's had very mediocre finishes. He's got a driver rating that's very mediocre. And so my model gives him an average finish of 14.3. So that's why I'm saying Kyle's a contrarian play, because he doesn't have a good track history. I think the thing he's got in his favor, we've been taking more downforce off the cars, and that favors the more talented drivers, which certainly Kyle Busch is. And then he's had a really fast car. So those are two things going in his favor. I'm going to think a lot of people will be on Larson and Truex, and so Kyle Busch will probably go under-owned. But, I could still see 20%, maybe 25% on Kyle Busch. I probably want to be around 30% because I think track history could scare off some people. So I'm not going to go bananas on Kyle Busch, just like I won't go bananas on Ty Dillon or anything like that. And that's because I think, at least different reasons, but I think in this case, probabilistically speaking, there's also a good chance Kyle Busch just doesn't have it here at Michigan. Maybe just practice well, but in the race, in that turbulence, doesn't practice as well and doesn't do as well. So certainly there's that chance for Kyle Busch to struggle. And we saw him, we saw in the Xfinity race on, I think it was lap 1 or something, he ended up in the grass. So definitely a tough track for him.
I think that makes sense. Whenever you say go bananas, I always think of that Simpsons episode with Ralph Wiggum where they're racing the fruit down the front of the bus. Yeah. Go banana.
Oh, God.
All right. Our next question is from Scott Kidd, who looks like he also just had a child. So congratulations. It appears as though our pole sitter has led a large amount of laps in the past, and it appears one dominator is the way to go. Do you see it that way?
I don't see one dominator as the way to go. I see two dominators as the way to go. And that's just because two dominators, there's been at least two dominators in every single race except the high downforce race in 2015. The high downforce race in 2015 was an experiment NASCAR did to see if drafting could play a positive effect at Michigan. And that didn't work out very well. They went the opposite way. And what we saw way back in 2013 was 4 or 5 different dominators. I mean, if I go and look at the dominator points, or the dominator percentage, I'd have to pull it up because I don't have it in front of me. But I know there was 5 drivers that led at least 10% of the laps. And then another that led 9, another that led 8, another that led 7% of the laps. So a lot of dominators in that first race in 2013 when they went to the Gen 6 car. The second race in 2015, kind of similar. Then in 2013, I should say. 2014, then we went down to like 4 dominators and maybe 3 dominators. And then 2015, we went down to 2 dominators, except that one race where there was only 1 dominator because of the high downforce race. Well, last year, we took a lot more downforce off the cars than we had ever done in 2015 or 14 or 13. And we went back up to 1 race with 2 dominators and 1 race with multiple dominators. So I think that was last year. This year, we've taken even more off. So I think we could see that direction as well. We also have to remember there's stage racing. We got 60-lap stages for the first 2 stages. So 60 and 60, I'll take us to 120 and then an 80-lap final stage. That could also help shuffle things up a little bit. So I think we'll see a multiple dominator race. I don't think we'll see a 1 dominator race.
That's really interesting. Very cool. Okay. Our next question is from our buddy Dean, who wants to know what amount of lineups are you running with both Truex and Larson versus what do you think the files will be?
I think that means the field will be, but
oh, the field. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I was like, I'm not quite sure what a file is.
Yeah, that was probably an autocorrect there. But anyway, I'll just say this now. I'm playing either Truex or Larson in 95% of my lineups. And I do have a little bit of overlap with them, 2 of them in some lineups, but it's not a huge amount of overlap. I do want to have some lineups where, there's a chance that both Truex and Larson, wreck out. Or okay, let's talk about this. So a couple weeks ago, I think it was at, can't remember which race. It may have been Dover, or it may have been, I the race after Dover. I think it was Dover. They were Larson and Truex were fighting for the lead, and Truex bumped Larson out of the way, and Larson said he's going to have some payback. Now, I don't think payback's going to happen at Michigan where we're going 200 miles an hour, but certainly I don't think they're going to necessarily race each other the easiest. So there's always a chance that something happens to both of them, and maybe neither of them are in the winning lineup. So I did want to leave some lineup space for those possibilities.
Very cool. What do you think about kind of the boys have at it mentality as far as that goes?
Yeah, I mean that's what NASCAR should allow, is they should allow them to beat and bang. What we don't want to see is safety threatened. Obviously, they need to draw a line at threatening safety, but if they just race each other hard, that's racing, right? Like if you race each other hard, you don't give each other room, that's just racing. That's being aggressive, and obviously that's, you know, trying to put your foot down, saying I'm not going to let you bully me around. You draw a line when you intentionally wreck somebody at a high-speed track, or you do something under caution, things like that. So the line really needs to come at safety. As long as you're not threatening safety and you're racing, even if it's hard and aggressive, I think that's okay.
I think it certainly makes the races more interesting to watch when they're racing hard versus kind of trying to be super polite or something.
Yeah,
so,
we don't want no damn PC-ness.
Definitely not. It's NASCAR. Okay, our next question is from Eric, and we've talked about this a lot actually today, but kind of any final thoughts on Ty Dillon as a possible fade with his mid-20s and practice speeds?
Yeah, he's definitely a possible fade. I think being underweight to the field on him, like I said, if you want to go 30 to 40%, I think you'll be underweight on the field, and that's probably more like the GTO range for what I would think Ty Dillon than the 45% I'm going to go. But if you go less, even less, then you're just, you know, you're taking a higher risk profile. It's definitely risky. So that's why I want a little bit of safety net built in with Ty Dillon, because if he finishes dead last, he's still going to get you 7 points. So, that's why I want Ty Dillon there, is just a little bit of safety net. So I'm going to go about equal weight to the field.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, Denny Hamlin, our boy from Virginia, a potential dominator with how fast the Gibbs cars have looked. What do you think about that?
Definitely a contrarian dominator, but I will say Rodney Childers, Kevin Harvick's crew chief. You know, he said, "What are the cars to beat?" He said, Larson, Truex, Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, his car, right? He's the crew chief for Kevin Harvick. He said those 4, and he said also look out for Denny Hamlin. So I think there's some contrarian appeal to Denny Hamlin this week. He won the Xfinity race. I wouldn't put a lot of stock in that, but he's been a little slower in practice than in qualifying in terms of single lap speed, but his 10 lap was a lot better in final practice. So I think that's pretty interesting. I'm definitely going to have some Denny Hamlin exposure. I'm just not going to go bananas because I think there's a lot more, I just mentioned 4 cars that I think are just as likely to dominate. And that didn't even talk about Brad Keselowski in that Rodney Childers tweet, who I think also has a very strong car. So Denny Hamlin, I can definitely get behind having some exposure to him. Second fastest 10-lap average in final practice. I can't hear you. All right, I think we lost Dina there. So it's just going to be me at this point. But we're right up on the, oh yeah, definitely the Zoom window change there. So yeah, let me adjust this crop here. I'm going to take some back off the top, move this window around, take some off the top there. All right, let's do that. So anyway, I think we lost Dina for a bit, and we're also right up on the hour, so I'm just going to take a couple more questions here. I've kind of been following along with her. It looks like she's back on. Dina, are you back?
Yeah, I think you were on one of the Wi-Fis and I was on the other one, and whatever
one of the Wi-Fis shut off. All right, let me recrop this image.
Okay.
Let me recrop this image. I don't even know if it cropped on the actual video because I don't think I pushed it to the video, but let me just play around with this here. We're almost up on the hour anyway, so cool. I think we're good. All right, Dina's back.
All right, I'm back. We have a question from Eric S. He wants to know the best cash plays under $6,500.
Best cash plays under $6,500. Obviously, Trevor Bayne and Ty Dillon are easily the 2 best cash plays.
Okay. And another question about Jamie McMurray. Is he usable at all, or is he a total fade?
I think he's 5 to 10% usable if you want to do that, but for the most part, I think he's a total fade. His practice times were slow. A lot of other cars that are better than his, and he's starting too far forward. So I'm fading Jamie Mack completely. If you want to play him, he's a contrarian play, a super contrarian play.
Very cool.
High risk. I should have written him up as a fade. I didn't even think about that, but I should have written him up as a fade in my article.
That makes sense, I think, today. Our next question is about JJ, not our cat, but Jimmy Johnson. Is there any concern that Jimmy Johnson probably won't dominate?
Oh, yeah, definitely a lot of concern that he won't dominate, especially because he's starting in the back. So what you're really playing Jimmy Johnson for is him coming through the field, him dominating in the last segment or something like that, as he usually does. So a lot of concern for him not dominating. I'm not going to have a ton of exposure on him, but I will have a little bit because there's Jimmy Johnson. He's Jimmy Johnson, man. Like, he was fast in practice. He had a good car, right? So if I go to the practice times here, if I pull up my practice times tab, 1 second, doing that. But he was fast. Like, he was third fast in second practice and ninth fast in final practice. He qualified 13th, so that's 4 to 10 spots better in single lap speed. Now, obviously, there's 10 laps and things like that we need to worry about, and the fact that he's going to the back and he's in a backup car, which I think doesn't matter too much. But because he's going to the back, he's a long way to get to the front. He can do it. He's done it multiple times. I think, 3 of his last 4 wins or 4 of his last 5 wins or something like that have come when his car has been sent to the rear of the field for the start of the race. So obviously, winning is not out of the question. It just makes him leading a lot of laps definitely out of the question in the first, I would say, segment for sure. So probably halfway through segment 2 would be as soon as he gets towards the front, I would think.
Very cool. All right. Devin wants to know the top 3 roster ownership percentages you have for GPPs.
I'm not going to give away all that information. I will say I'm going relatively chalky with my top 3 guys.
That makes sense. You can give away all the secrets, I guess.
Can't give away all the secret sauce, but my top 3 I think are relatively chalky plays. One of them is Ty Dillon. I've already mentioned 45% exposure to him, and so he will be one of my 3. But right around that 45% exposure is my peak exposure, and there's 3 drivers right there.
Very cool. All right. Alex Martin wants to know how many drivers could we realistically start from the top 10 for GPPs?
How many drivers from the top 10? I'd say up to 3, maybe. You can get a race where, you got Kyle Larson and or Martin Truex Jr. dominating, probably 1, but then I could still see somebody like either Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, maybe an outside chance of Joe Logano dominating. So those are 2 you might have right there from dominators. And then let's say Clint Bowyer finishes really high, or let's say 3 drivers in the top 10 dominate. I think the max you want to have is 3, but most of the lineups I will have 2.
All right.
And there will be some ones as well, some 1 lineups in the top 10 as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. You have to balance it, right?
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Okay. Ryan wants to know, you talked about guys in the 7,800 to 7,100 range on the pod. Are there any of those guys that you really like?
78 to 7,100 range on the pod, a lot. Yeah, I mean, we definitely talked about a lot of them earlier on the show. Daniel Suarez, Casey Kane, Dale Jr., Ryan Newman, Austin Dillon. All those guys I will definitely have exposure to. I think I already ranked them, so I would definitely rank them, Daniel Suarez and Dale Jr. 1 and 2. Probably Kane and Newman, pretty close 3 and 4 right there. And then 5 would probably be Austin Dillon for me. So those are what I like. I think Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is 6th there because he's 7,100. So a lot of good drivers in that range, and I think solving that range is going to be key to winning a GPP this week.
Very cool. All right. Well, we're talking about GPPs. One of our listeners wants to know about Darrell Wallace Jr. Is 15. I like him a lot. I actually might start rooting for him next year when Dale is gone. I know.
Well,
I still have a lot of time.
We'll have to see.
Yeah, I'm hoping he gets a cup ride. I think that would be a full-time cup ride next year for him would be awesome.
Yep.
But one of our listeners wants to know, in GPP, is 15% give or take too much or okay for Bubba?
I think that's totally fine. 10%, 5%, 15%. I think that 5 to 15% range. He's the one driver I don't mind. Like, I guess the 2 drivers I don't mind dipping down below 6,000 for. I mentioned Chris Buescher and Darrell Wallace Jr. And Bubba, playing him allows you to get a lot of those expensive drivers in that we mentioned could dominate. So if you want to, what I like doing, where I really like using Bubba is in these smaller GPPs with like maybe 100 to 2,000 people, or they're like 3-entry max, because just nailing the dominators in those really oftentimes gets you into the top 10% of the field. And right, they pay out the top 20%. So if you're getting in the top 10%, then you're definitely starting to hit some pay jumps. And so I like using Bubba in that, because then you can take like 4 shots at dominators. Because if you nail all 2 or 3 dominators, you're going to be in that top 10% most likely, especially if one of them is more of a contrarian dominator. So I like in a 3 max doing like Bubba and either, like Trevor Bayne or Ty Dillon or something like that, and then taking 4 shots at dominators and doing those for all 3 of my 3 max lineups. I think that's a really cool way to have a chance at least 1, maybe 2 lineups inside that top 10 right there, or top 10% of the field right there.
Very cool. Okay. Brian, we already talked a little bit about McMurray, but he also wants to know about Kenseth. What do you think about him?
I'm not touching Kenseth. I think, if we go over here to Kenseth, qualified 9th, practiced 18th and 13th in the 2 post-qualifying practice sessions in single lap speed. I'm going to flip over here to look up if he has a 10-lap average. Kenseth was down there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8th or 9th in 10-lap average in final practice. And that's with only 19 cars taking a final lap. So there was a lot of good cars, probably that at least 1 or 2 that could have been even faster than Kenseth that didn't make a final lap 10-lap average, like Jimmy Johnson, for example. So not on the Kenseth train this week.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Okay, one of our listeners is interested in fading Dillon, and what would your recommended pivot away from him be?
I think there's a few. I mentioned Chris Buescher. Obviously, Darrell Walls Jr. could be a pivot. I think Danica Patrick is a pivot right there at 6,200. Paul Menard and of course Trevor Bayne, but I think Trevor Bayne's going to be pretty chalky. So I think those are like your pivot range right there away from Ty Dillon would be those 4 or 5 drivers that I just mentioned in that similar price range. They all start further ahead than Ty Dillon because, they all qualified in the 31 to 24 range. But that's the way you want to pivot is if you're not going to play the guy who starts dead last, you're going to want to play the next best drivers in that price range. And those are the 4 or 5 that I would play.
Very cool. Our listener Ryan is interested in a single entry lineup. He wants to know, can you fade Larson and Truex, or is it quote unquote donkey of me?
I think it's a really risky play. Of course, if it works out, you aren't even guaranteed to have the winning lineup because you probably still need to nail the other dominators. So if you fade Larson and Truex, what do? You go with like Kyle Busch, Kevin Harvick, and Brad Keselowski. I mean, you'll probably pick up the dominator points that way. But what if it's Joey Logano or Denny Hamlin or somebody else that leads the race? So I think if you fade Larson and Truex, what you're going to want to do is you're going to do a 4 dominator lineup. And when I say dominator, I'm including Harvick and Keselowski in this. So you want to pick probably 4 of Harvick, Keselowski, Kyle Busch, Joey Logano, and Denny Hamlin. I think you're going to want to pick 4 of those 5 drivers because you're really going to want to absorb the dominator points if you're fading both Larson and Truex. And then go with 2 dirt cheap drivers like Darrell Walls Jr., Ty Dillon, something like that. So that's a strategy I would do if I was fading both of them. It's so hard to fade both of them. I think even in a single entry lineup, I'd probably pick one or the other. I do think in a single entry, fading one of the 2 is a good thing to do. So I think that's probably the best way to approach this, would be picking one or the other. That said, if it's a single entry and you don't mind, I mean, if you're going for the win, fade them both, right? Like, that's fine. But if you're going for a cash, I'd probably just play either Larson or Truex.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Our next question is from our buddy David James, and it's probably my favorite question I've seen yet today. Why have we not had a Dale Jr. question yet?
Yeah, hell yeah. What the hell? Where's our Dale Jr. questions? I like Dale Jr. this week, and I think I've seen it, man. I've seen it so many times. People saying, I'm done with Dale Jr. I'm done with him. I'm never playing him again. I'm never playing him because he always kills me. Well, shoot, all you guys don't play Dale Jr. I'll play Dale Jr. when he ends up in the winning lineup. How about that? That sounds good. No, I really like Dale Jr. this week. The good track for him. He's won here multiple times. Very happy with his car in final practice. He doesn't have like the top speeds to show it, but for him, he's one of those like Kevin Harvick where you don't need to have the top speeds. You need to be comfortable. And Dale Jr. is happy with his car. Great track for him. He was faster in practice than he was in terms of qualifying rank. So I really like Dale Jr. this week. I'm going to have a lot of exposure to him.
I like to hear that. I always like my Dale Jr.
Yeah, and I hope everybody else fades him.
That would be awesome. Woohoo.
Yeah, go Dale. Dale, yeah.
All right. Dale, yeah, exactly.
I think we got a couple more time for a couple more questions here.
Okay. It looks like we've got about 3 more questions queued up. Is that
perfect.
Awesome? Okay, so we'll just answer those 3 and then let everyone go finish their lineups.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom wants to know, give him an argument for using each of the following over each other: Bane, Bubba, and Menard.
So I think the argument for using Bane is he's got the best car, easily. Very fast car. This is it's not a horrible track for him, and it's not a great track for him, but I think it's in slightly better than average track for him. If you look at his track history, he actually does perform better than his teammate Ricky Stenhouse Jr. here. Bane obviously starting too far back. That means a lot of place differential potential, priced at $6,400, so he's priced $700 cheaper than his teammate. He's a very chalky play. Bane is the chalk this week. He's got a top 21-ish car, 21, 2019, 18 in that range, and he starts 27th. So very good price. Definitely, I think he's an argument for one of the top 2 or 3 chalks of the week. That said, Menard is an argument for Menard over Bane would just be as a pivot play. Let's say something happens to Bane. Maybe his wife goes into labor midway through the race or something, or he crashes, right? So Menard is the pivot off of Bane. Menard has a good track history. Don't get me wrong there. This is a good track for him, but I don't like the downforce situation here with him. I don't like how he's run this year. So not on Menard relative to Bane, but Menard is a pivot off of Bane. So that's the argument for Menard over Bane is a GPP type pivot. I think Menard probably could go a little too highly owned as well. So that's not an argument for him, but that's kind of just what I'm saying there. Bubba, I think the argument for him is in these lineups where you want to go multiple dominators. I think the argument for Bubba comes in these smaller tournament fields, the 3 max, 2,000 people, 4,100 people fields. The argument becomes really good for Bubba because you want to absorb a lot of dominator points. Make sure you nail the dominators, and Bubba allows you to do that. Bubba is also just underpriced, flatly underpriced. He should not be 5,700. I know he struggled last week with the pit road speed and all that, and the new EFI and all these different fancy schmancy things he doesn't have in the Xfinity series. But I think he'll get that corrected out. He had a whole race to work it out. He's had a lot of practice to work it out. He's in Eric Almirola's car, and Eric Almirola is priced in the mid 6K range. I don't think Bubba's any worse of a driver than Eric Almirola. Obviously, there's some novice factor there, so you maybe want to price him a little cheaper, but this is too cheap. So Bubba, the argument there is price.
I think that's a good argument. Always is. Okay, Eric wants to know, do you like Newman better than Suarez for cash?
Do I like Newman better than Suarez for cash? No, I definitely like Suarez. I'm not playing Newman in cash at all. He's not a cash game play. Suarez, infinity % better than Newman in cash games. Now, obviously in GPPs, when we're talking upside and things like that, different story. But in cash, definitely 100% I would take Suarez over Newman.
Very cool. I like Suarez a lot too. I think he's going to be a really good driver.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. Our last question from Eric. He needs a cash play that's not named to Dylan, so I guess not a grandchild of Mr. Childress, under $6,300.
I don't think I have any of those, at least in my cash game lineups. But I guess if you wanted to do that, you'd have to use either Bubba or Chris Buescher. You could also go the Landon Castle route because it's really safe there, but he doesn't have any upside whatsoever. So I want a driver who at least has a modicum of upside. So for me, it's either going to be Buescher or Bubba Wallace. Understand the Castle argument, obviously, but he's in a backup car. That's not good for him. He was super slow in practice. No upside whatsoever for Landon Castle. The only thing you have there is maybe a bit of safety just in starting position, but I don't even think there's necessarily safety in him avoiding DNFs. We saw him crash in practice. Backup car, there's a lot of things that could go wrong with Landon Castle. So I'm going to lean towards either Buescher or Bubba in cash games if you want to go that route, but I might just try to find a different roster construction and not use either Bubba or Buescher as well, although I don't necessarily hate those roster constructions.
Well, very cool. I think that's all the questions we've had for today. So everyone go off, finish your lineups, and good luck.
Yeah, good luck everyone this week. And want one of you to win a damn qualifier so we can compete against each other in the qualifiers. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that will be really cool. And as usual, Nick will be live tweeting the race. So be sure to follow him and all his crazy tweets. And he'll be running around the house like a crazy person, just a normal Sunday in the Giffen house.
That's right. With my Black Butte Porter. Beer.
Exactly.
Didn't get the Budweisers this week. I got the Black Butte Porter. That's one of my favorite beers. That's like an actual good beer.
Yeah, when we go to Trader Joe's, they don't have Budweiser there, obviously, so we have to get the Black Butte instead.
Yeah, so hey, how was your first NASCAR DFS show, Dina?
I was really fun. Thanks for having me. I hope you have me back. If you're smart, I think you will.
Yeah, happy wife, happy life, I think is the rule
exactly.
There. But no, seriously, we're really glad you did this, and we will try to get you a webcam set up for next week. I don't know what's going on with your built-in there, but
we'll have to bug Lenovo about it, but we'll figure it out. Very cool. And I did want to say shout out to our friend, Mr. Stevie Young. I am wearing all my Dale Jr. stuff as predicted.
Yes, there you go. Stevie gets the shout out. All right, guys. Really appreciate y'all tuning into the show. Back at it as usual next week, and give Dina a shout out at Dina Giffenator. DEENAGIFFENATOR on Twitter. That's the Roto wife, I guess, if you want to call her that. But really, she's just Dina. She's the bomb. So we'll talk to you again next week. Really, really looking forward to this race here at Michigan. And good luck, everyone. Take care.